Should any team in any sport be allowed to make the playoffs if they have a losing record in the regular season? Let's dive down that rabbit hole. Bubba O'Neill, 5 NHL teams this year. Now, it was a different playoffs, but 5 teams with a losing record in the regular season made the playoffs. 3 NBA teams with a losing record in the regular season made the playoffs. 2 Major League Baseball teams. I mean, that's supposed to be the hardest playoffs to get into. 2 Major League Baseball teams, Houston and Milwaukee, made it in with a losing record. Should this be blasted from the rules? A new rule that says if you have a losing regular season record, sorry, you're not invited?
So are you saying that perhaps that we should introduce sort of what the CFL does and in its own little way, a kind of crossover for all sports and all divisions? So this way we avoid all 500 teams? Mm-hmm. I wouldn't be against that. I'll be honest with you, because I think it kind of looks bad on the league. And as we've discussed before, and I might have said before, I'm a big fan of the champion, or at least having the goal.
You didn't like your answer.
Nope. Keep going. I had to step away for a second. I realized there was noise in the background. Keep going.
I'm a big fan of the best team having the opportunity at winning the championship, not the hottest team, because it would lead me to believe that the team that sneaks in at a 500 clip is a team that kind of rallied to get into the postseason. And that's great to see, and that's always exciting, I guess, to some extent at the end of the season. But I think the teams that have the best overall record should always qualify for the postseason.
Yeah, I think the CFL kind of has it right in this regard in trying to get the best teams into the playoffs. It doesn't always work that way because, as we've seen in past years, the fifth place team in the West has a better record than even the second place team in the East. Logistically, I think it could still work because, you're really launching into a new season. So, the regular season records don't really matter. You just pick the best 8 or 16 or whatever the league is teams, and they all make the playoffs. I think that it would certainly create, conversations among fan bases. Certainly in baseball and basketball and even in football and hockey, there are teams when they start the season, they know they're not making the playoffs. But those bubble teams, those 32 and 40 NBA teams that are trying to get into the playoffs in the last couple of weeks of the season, they would be eliminated because out in the East there might be a couple of teams that are better and they deserve to get in. I think when it comes to the postseason, fans want to see best on best, and every year really we don't get to see that.
I just think it diminishes so much the value of the regular season if you're a losing team and you still get a chance to win a championship. I think that it is, there can be an argument, I suppose, that there's a Cinderella story that some team that barely got in or found a loophole to get in gets hot in the playoffs and goes on to win. I suppose there can be a nice story there, but what's the point of the regular season then? And if you're asking people to spend a lot of money and commit a lot of time and a lot of emotional investment into this, there should be some reason for it. That's what I think.
Well, and it kind of gets into this whole, like I was saying, this hot versus best argument. In the Canadian Football League, I believe the BC Lions won a Grey Cup with an 8-10 record. We saw further back a team, I believe the Ottawa Rough Riders. I would have to check this. I believe they were 3-13 or 3-15, and pushed we actually played against the Edmonton Eskimos, and in that dynasty, I believe, which was their 5 championships, that 5th one was against the Ottawa Rough Riders, who had won 3 games that year. And to me, doesn't that kind of make it look at all Mickey Mouse, your championship match?
Definitely, and I think even. We wouldn't have to necessarily get rid of the divisions either, because those are basically constructed to formulate a season. Interdivision matchups, external division matchups. We see it all the time in the NFL. I mean, every league kind of does that. I would be against a league that does not have any division. We see it in soccer all the time, and really half the teams are gone by week 5 or 6 into the season. You look at the table and you can cross off many teams. The best teams and the ones that invest the most money and invest the most in training and scouting are rewarded by, showcasing their talents on the field and then getting the maximum points at the end of the year. But if we did that in the NHL and the NBA and Major League Baseball and even the NFL or even the CFL, I think there'd be a lot of fan bases that would lose interest halfway through the year. And I think ownerships and league commissioners are looking at that to say, I don't know if we want that.
But doesn't that then put the onus on the teams that have had their fans lose interest to say, I got to be better next year. We've got to be better. And to me, it's a natural, I hate this word so much, but I'm going to use it, organic way of forcing teams to be competitive and not just to be there to make money or drag themselves along. Look, the no division thing, I kind of get you, but at the same time, I would be totally on board if the NHL, for example, went back to what they used to do back in the 21 team era, where it was 1 versus 16, 2 versus 15, whatever, and really give the teams that do well an advantage. Now, I'm arguing against myself in a sense because back in those days, there were lots of teams under 500 that made it in simply because they had so many teams out of the 21 get in. But now, with 32 teams in all leagues, except for the CFL, you don't have to have any losing teams make it into the playoffs ever, and you can still do 1 versus 16 or some version of that.
Ricky talked about that. I think you pointed to English soccer as a sort of have and have-nots. But I mean, I think when you look at it, North America here, with the exception of I'm presuming baseball, which have a luxury tax, we have a salary cap. So there is an evening out process, in my belief, in terms of those leagues and what you can spend and how far you can go over the cap. So to me, it's almost normalized and now pressured on the team and its general managers, scouting staff, etc., to put together the best quality product. Now, within that salary cap, we generally do see teams that range from the floor to the top. So I believe that will always happen. But at the end of the day, an opportunity is there for teams to be as good as each other.
I've always thought about the division makeup, because if you're in a division and you're in second place in that division, your fans are looking at the top spot or trying to fend off third place. If you're a GM or a coach, you're trying to either elevate or try to fend off the next team. If it's 1 through 32, that second place team in the X division might be 23rd overall, and you're not in the playoff picture, but you are in a division format. So I think there's good and bad with both kind of formats.
Well, look, I mean, around here, fans of Toronto teams are getting pretty familiar with this one because most of the time the AL East, not this year, Boston was no good, but most of the time the AL East is so top heavy that you are constantly trying to beat one of the giants at least. Mm-hmm. Lately in the NHL, you've got to get past Tampa or Boston, who have both won recent cups. Tampa just won. Obviously hasn't been successful. Some would say, well, you got to deal with what you got to deal with. You got to beat the best to win, so beat the best early on. Yeah. But again, back to the point, and it's not really the Leafs or the Jays or any other teams we're talking about. Arizona, Chicago, Anaheim, Montreal, Columbus in the NHL this year, all into the playoffs, all with a losing record.
Special circumstances here, I think.
It's an unusual year. It is unquestionably an unusual year. Same with Houston and Milwaukee in baseball, Brooklyn, Orlando, Portland in basketball. But we have seen teams with losing records make it in before. And again, to me, it's like, you know what? I would have a contingency plan built in if I was a league. I don't know how you do it. Playoffs is all about revenue generation. Yeah. So have a contingency plan that changes something that allows you for a couple more games somewhere along the way if you have to tell a team you're not in and we don't have the same number of teams, or if you change some rule that says if you're under 500, the best team that's over 500 gets it. Something. To me, it just makes absolutely no sense that you could be rewarded for being bad.
Well, I think ultimately the last thing you want is more regular season games, right? No. So I think we want less of that, quite honestly.
I agree.
And it's weird, though, because the NFL, we don't really have this discussion too often. I mean, very rarely does a team at 7-9, I believe the Saints a couple of years ago slipped in as a division winner on a rare year where one particular division was just incredibly poor. But I can only remember maybe twice in the last 20 years where that has actually happened. So something's working with the way they're doing their format. And that's probably because it's harder to get in the postseason. So again, this is incumbent upon leagues, and now we're battling this discussion about, the league want more games and they want more playoff revenue, and so do the teams and the franchises, so they can pay players. So we're in this kind of weird argument about, playing more games against least games in the regular season and making it more difficult, but teams need more money. So I don't know where the balance is.
Yeah, no more regular season games. I'm not lobbying for that at all. I'm saying you can adjust the playoffs if you end up with having to tell a team, like in the CFL, let's say there was only 5 teams that had a winning record. You find a contingency plan and say, we're only having 5 teams in the playoffs. We'll figure something else out to add an extra game somewhere. There's got to be a way to do it, but
the easiest way to do it, and we've seen it in the NHL this year especially, is reduce the number of playoff teams. You have half the teams in the NBA, half in the NHL. MLB expanded to 16 from 10. The NBA, more often than not, you'll have a sub 500 team or a 500 team to make the playoffs, but half the teams make the postseason. When you look at the schedule, there are a few dominant teams and there are some really bad teams, and there's a cluster of teams in the middle that are either 5 or 10 games over 500 or 5 or 10 below. Some of them get in, some of them don't. I think cutting the number of playoff teams would ensure that everyone who makes the postseason will have a winning record. That's not going to happen because playoffs is when the owners and the teams that are in the playoffs, the owners make their most money because that playoff revenue is gold, is gravy.
And the worst part, Rick, is I agree they're probably not going to cut back. I think there's ways that you could do it to make sure teams only got in with a winning record and still have the same number of playoff games, but I don't know they'll do it. But the worst part is I am very, very starting to believe very much that baseball, having tasted 16 teams in the playoffs this year, even though it was an unusual circumstance, is going to go, ooh, that was kind of nice. Mm-hmm. That regularly now, and then we're having this discussion, losing teams in baseball getting into the playoffs. I will almost be shocked now if baseball doesn't come back with some sort of move to expand to 16 teams in the playoffs going forward, which I think would be just a terrible mistake, but are not the ones with money.
They would have to do one of two things: either start the season earlier or cut the number of games. Go back to 154, give yourself an extra week, 2 weeks at the end of the season to get these best of 3 wildcard series in. Otherwise, we're going to be playing the World Series in December.
Well, I think it's a done deal, guys. And I'm being maybe a little facetious here, but I think it's a done deal. I think they are looking at this format right now with expanded playoffs. We've seen teams or leagues, expand maybe by 2 teams. They went from 10 to 16, I believe, guys, in Major League Baseball. I think they love it right now. Hence, today is Wednesday. There are 8 playoff games today, and I think they love it. Games all day long.
If there was a closed circuit camera in the owners' booths of these places, it would look like the Scrooge McDuck character sitting on his piles of gold coins, rubbing his hands. And that's exactly what this is right now. It's like, it can be mediocre and get in now and have those.
Yes,
because they're looking at the possibility of full stadiums and extra games, and 6 more teams have at least a couple of games, maybe 3.
Let me throw one more idea at you then. If baseball was really going to do this, and I do think that they will talk about it, and I do think it's a very good possibility, at the very least, what if you mitigate this by saying in the first round, anyway, the team at the top of this, the higher ranked team, so presumably a winning record team guaranteed, gets all the home games and all the revenue. So you can get to the playoffs and you can have your stretch drive, but you're getting nothing out of the playoffs if you're one of the lower teams. That I would almost then, I still hate it, but it would make it somehow more palatable that it's not just a money grab for the mediocre teams.
But isn't that kind of what's happening now? Because the best of 3s are all being played at the higher seeded team right now. Now I don't know how the revenue.
That's a COVID thing, though. That's a COVID thing, so you don't have to travel.
Yeah, and I don't know. I think, though, Scott, that if they do that, I think they will adopt that, because even you have to have these 3 games played in a tight 6 to 5 day span, and there can be no travel. So your advantage if you say, well, we'll use the Jays and Tampa because it's 1 versus 8. Your advantage, because you do have to play in the first round now for Tampa, is that you do get all 3 games. And I think that's the way they're going to line it up. And that's the way they'll sell it to us as in, well, you know what, hey, yeah, Tampa worked real hard all season long, but they do have the advantage of playing all 3 games at home.
Yeah, that should be the reward for the top 4 teams in each American League and National League. You get to host this best of 3 wild card, whether it's 2 or 3 games, whatever the case is. You get all the revenue, you get everything. Then come the division series, then we can go back and forth with travel.
I still say you have a losing record, you should receive no playoff revenue whatsoever. If you're a losing record team and they're going to shove you in there, at the very least, we've solved this right now. At the very least, you get in, but you get nothing out of it, except unless you win a championship. That might assuage me a little bit, but I still hate the idea of losing teams getting in.
They can still send a little more merchandise.
Well, it could be. Yeah, that's true. And beer and other things.
And flex packs for next year.
Would you be in favor? Would you be in favor?
You sound like the Blue Jays. They'll sell that flex pack. Way to be there, Atkins.
Would you be in favor of no losing teams ever making the playoffs, losing record teams? Or would you say, no, that's fine? I mean, some people would say, throw them all in. Let's have a complete every team gets in participation tournament like we have in House League. What do you think? Our Twitter handles are up on the screen. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear your comments. Comment down below, subscribe, hit the notification button so you know when these come out. We would love to talk to you again soon. Have a great day.